So members obviously should just we're here for one purpose today, which is to get a briefing on the issue to do with legislative consent motions, or a specific legislative consent motion. Okay. Thanks, Tom. Okay. So members, welcome to the 51st meeting of the Committee for Finance in the 22 to 27 mandate. As always, this will be broadcast online throughout Parliament buildings. If you're in the public gallery, put your phone on silent or airplane mode. Apologies, we have received. We haven't received. We
think there are members who may just
join
here on time.
Because we're obviously meeting at unusual time. So, declaration of interest. Is anyone an interest to declare?
Yes, please, Chair. I need to declare an interest because I'm a member of the Windsor Framework Democratic Scrutiny Committee, and there are issues that are likely to appear in this are similar to other committees and other departments across the Northern Ireland Assembly. So, agenda item 3 was the main purpose of today's meeting, which is to get a briefing from the Department of Finance on the legislative consent motion, or lack thereof, on the data use and access bill. There's an extremely serious situation which has emerged in which the committee has extremely belatedly received notification of an LCM and associated memorandum. This is despite the fact that it has been clear from last autumn that the UK government was going to introduce this legislation, and there would be parts of that legislation that would not just apply to Northern Ireland but apply in devolved areas, therefore create the necessity for a legislative consent motion. As people will know, the convention, since the devolved convention in the UK, also known as the Sewell Convention, is that the UK government shall not legislate in devolved areas without seeking the specific legislative consent of the devolved legislatures. Scotland and Wales both managed to lay their legislative consent memorandums, do the necessary scrutiny, and pass in, I think, April and May, respectively, legislative consent memoranda, legislative consent motions, I should say. We have not. We haven't done either of those things. On the, I believe, the 28th of May, we received notification that this LCM would be coming to the committee. That is in plain breach of standing orders, which necessitate that there should be 10 days. A 10-day period should follow after it becomes clear, after a bill is introduced by the UK government, or new clauses to a bill via amendment which invoke the LCM process. None of that has happened, so we are now in a position where I think we literally can't pass an LCM, or if we pass an LCM, it would be so out with the boundaries of convention and meaning that it would make an absurdity out of the process. So it's very important that we understand how this happened, where we go from here, what lessons we can draw. So we have two officials. We have the Permanent Secretary of the Department, Neil Gibson, and Paul Duffy, who's Deputy Secretary for Digital and Finance Services. It would be helpful if one of you could make a brief opening statement to tell us, with the greatest respect, how the bleep this happened.
Thank you, Chair. I'll provide opening remarks. Morning, Chair, Deputy Chair, members. I welcome the opportunity to be here this morning with Paul. Can I start firstly with an apology? This is not a situation we should have found ourselves in. And as Permanent Secretary for the Department, I take full responsibility for the issue that we find ourselves with today. I've taken it upon myself to try and understand better why we got to the point that we got, and what I'm going to try to do in the next couple of moments is give you a flavour of how we got to where we got to, and importantly what we intend to do now and what lessons we might have taken from this. But as always, we very welcome the committee and its engagement on this, and I'm sure you will have points to make. There are things that were not handled in the way that I, as the Permanent Secretary, would strive for, and I hope that the committee will recognise in our engagement thus far that we do aim and strive to be a transparent and open department, and therefore there was no intent to keep the committee away from this particular issue, but rather we were going through a particular journey that we hadn't experienced before, and we actually think there'll be some very important learning lessons, not just for myself and for the department, but indeed for the wider service, as I think there are some issues that we're going to touch on today that are likely to return and come up again. So I'm going to give you a very quick flavour. I'm not going to go through the ins and outs of the bill. You will have seen the correspondence on that, and Paul can answer to any specific questions in a moment, but rather talk through a little bit about how we got to where we got to today. So, we are obviously dealing, as Chair has said in the introduction, that you received the details of the devolved provisions too late for the proper scrutiny that the committee would have expected to do. So the bill, as you've alluded to, was introduced in the House of Lords in late October 24. The Minister wrote to DSIT Secretary of State in mid-November to agree in principle to the progressing of the legislative consent motion. But given the nature of the bill, UKG was required to complete an Article 2.1 Windsor Framework Assessment, and the Department engaged DSO to provide a view on the UK's assessment. Unfortunately, the UKG were unable to share that full assessment with us to be able to scrutinise their assessment, and therefore we couldn't really provide, DSO were unable to provide the sufficient, did not have the sufficient detail to provide a clear enough view. That required us then to have ongoing direct engagement between DSO and DSIT officials to allow them to provide the advice accordingly. That complex process took about 2.5 months to complete, so notably a process that Wales or Scotland don't have to do. That then led to the situation that we found ourselves in which the LCM was passed to the Assembly too late. So you will have seen in the timeline that you've been provided that 2.5 month delay, if you will, as that legal work was carried out. We also had a number, as would be normal, queries to be answered that the Minister had around the legislation.
Can I just ask at that point, Neil, why didn't the Department see fit to tell us that it was being delayed for that reason? I should say, on behalf of our very able clerk team here, they engaged the Department immediately. They became aware from the Business Office that this was going to be pertinent and there was going to have to be an LCM, and it was clear from the Speaker's Office that this LCM was going to have to move. Why didn't you tell us, as it were, that this was the reason for delay?
Yeah, very much. It seems obvious in hindsight that we should have done that. One of the things we're going to be enacting after this is a kind of tracker, if you will, of all the LCMs that we have, so we can keep you regularly updated month by month. Is there any particular, has it gone for assessment under Windsor? What would be the delay? So absolutely that's on us as not being proactive to tell you what those various stages were. And indeed for myself, important that I have that tracker to my hand, because it's very easy when one goes off into that legal world. You have to remember to keep chasing and see where it is at. So that was obviously an area, and I'm sure we'll pick that up in questions about that process. So the question then is what to do now. So over the last week we've engaged with the Assembly Business Office, the Clerk, the NIO and DSIT to chart what might be the way forward. There are essentially 3 options on the table. Move forward with the current process, but as you've said, Chair, with the limited ability to provide the kind of scrutiny that might be expected, highly unlikely that would be the most prudent course, and indeed whether any motion would carry under those circumstances. We could withdraw entirely from the LCM process, which would not obviously be good for relations with UKG and indeed with the Assembly. And the preferred option, and the one that last evening Minister gave permission to proceed on, is to work with an amended process. Now this has been come through from advice from the Assembly Business Office through the Legislation Machinery of Government branch and TEO as a preferred approach, which would be that instead of bringing forward for consent, that we would have an amended process which allows a discussion, but actually it's for noting rather than to provide consent at the Assembly. Doesn't answer all the questions you will have, but it does at least allow the conversation around the bill to take place in the House. The Minister has agreed, as I say, late last night, that that would be the preferred approach and the one that he has.
Just to be clear, will the Minister or the Department be recommending legislative consent to the Assembly?
No, we'll be asking for the Assembly to note the
so it'll be like most of the other debates we have, it'll simply be a take note debate.
Take note debate, because for the reasons you said, you wouldn't have the time for the kind of scrutiny that you might have expected. But it does at least allow that conversation to take place around what this particular bill is. Given the timescales and the challenges, I think with hindsight we should have been considering that alternative option earlier in the process, recognising the challenges that the Windsor Framework assessment might have brought to this process. We probably should have had it on the table as a way forward earlier. Wasn't one that was familiar to myself or to Paul, regrettably, but it will certainly be on the list going forward. We will supplement this approach with a motion to the Assembly to note the passing of the bill, and for the Assembly to further note the provisions that deal with devolved matters, but not an LCM in the traditional way. I want to just finish with where I started, which is to apologise that this isn't something that I would like to see happen again. We will have a better tracking system and engagement with yourselves as a committee as to any outstanding LCMs that we have and where they are, and a regular update on their progress. I also think, as I've alluded to, this was complex for us in terms of engaging on the Windsor legal advice, and I would contend that it's something we're going to see again, and it's something we're engaging and will be engaging with NIO as well in relation to their ability to reflect on the time period that might need to be given in order for Windsor considerations to be taken locally here, whenever bills whenever that exercise needs to be carried out. I don't think this will be the last time that happens, and those are new areas in some ways, so the legal process can be quite complex. We would hope, obviously, to be able to be in receipt of the full UKG assessment in future occasions so that we can do that work a little bit faster. But as you've already alluded to, Chair, I think my biggest regret sitting here today is just the level of update for you that you could have been provided in terms of the steps that we were taking. We were working on it, and hopefully that's given some explanation of how we've got to where we are today. But very happy, myself and Paul, to take questions.
Okay, thank you. Members, indicate if you wish to ask a question. I suppose, first of all, it's worth establishing what this bill is and what it does, because it wasn't entirely clear from our last session on this that the officials were totally abreast of what this bill did, and it's important to understand what the bill does as a whole, as well as in order to understand the bits that engage the devolved competencies and therefore require an LCM. Could someone give us a very brief overview of the purpose of the Data Use and Access Bill?
I'll pass to Paul for that, but it is worth saying, obviously, our focus will always be on the bits that we have a locus on. Our ability to understand a wider bill that would be considered in Westminster is not something we'll necessarily know all the detail that you might.
You're not writing the bill, but it is surely a basic thing to be broadly aware of the point of an entire bill, because you can't really understand how it interacts with the devolved scene or the devolved statute book or devolved competence unless you understand the broader competence. But anyway, Paul, if you could give us a brief overview.
Yes, Chair. Chair, I suppose overall the stated purpose of the bill is to harness the power of data.
Yeah.
It is largely about how that data can be used then for economic growth, support modern digital government, and improve people's lives. So it's quite a wide-ranging bill. At the moment, some of the issues that are currently holding the bill up are around some issues around artificial intelligence and copyright law. That has meant the bill has been ping-ponging back and forth at the moment between the House of Lords and the House of Commons. As the committee has been updated, the three areas of the bill contain provisions that deal with devolution matters are smart data, which fall to the Department for Economy, the National Underground Asset Register, which falls to the Department for Infrastructure, and then amendments to the Digital Economy Act around the data sharing gateway, which the Department of Finance has been leading on. So those are the three main elements. In terms of the smart data, it's about making sure that there's an opportunity to secure sharing of customer data with authorised parties upon the customer's request, so that would facilitate things like open banking, switching of bank accounts and things. The issue around the National Underground Asset Register is, as I suppose it says, it's about recording the apparatus on our streets and underneath the ground. And the last element, as I say, is around the data sharing gateway. I should say that the Digital Economy Act was not enacted in Northern Ireland, so that element, although there is a change to the provisions, and there would need to be a piece of legislation to enact the Digital Economy Act in Northern Ireland. That occurred, I think it was in 2017, it was when the bill went through, and at the time the Assembly wasn't sitting.
Okay, so if we take it your account that the main reason for delay is around clarity on the Windsor framework implications, what specific questions were you asking about Article 2 of the Windsor Framework is the bit which covers no diminution of rights. What were the specific concerns?
The issues, so
And the Human Rights Commission did raise concerns to the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission.
yeah, so the engagement around the Windsor Framework implications was largely done between legal representatives. When we asked the UK government for an assessment, for their assessment on it, to be fair, we got a line that simply said that the data protection rights and safeguards fall outside the scope of Article 2 of the Windsor Framework, and even if they were within scope, they believed that there were strong arguments that the bill's provisions do not diminish these rights. So
All you got from the UK government was 3 lines.
yes. So on that basis, then we asked DSO to engage with DSIP because we weren't getting direct engagement. So that was the piece of work. Then it took 3 months, in a sense, for DSO to be satisfied with the engagement with and the feedback from DSIP colleagues.
Was the concern that these would be rights that are under GDPR?
That was an element of it, and actually, DSO concluded that they were in agreement with DSIP's assessment at that time.
DSO here did agree with the UK government's assessment. Yes. So what was the hold-up?
But it did take 3 months until they were satisfied.
It took 3 months for DSO to be satisfied here.
Yes.
Yes.
And again, at that point, it would have been helpful for us to know that this discussion was happening. Just
Absolutely.
on the specific points about GDPR and the Windsor Framework and Article 2, this will seem fairly hieroglyphic to some people watching. GDPR is the General Data Protection Rule, which is an EU rule. It governs how data is shared, including across borders. It's very important in terms of those rules around how your data is protected, but it also has a significant cross-border impact for any organisation that moves data on a cross-border basis, whether that's a news organisation that wants to have people see their content in both jurisdictions, or the GAA or the Church of Ireland, all those organisations which need to use data on a cross-border basis. So that's, I presume, part of the context. Okay.
Yeah, and it was ensuring that that there was no future divergence between UK and EU data protection
Has the
standards.
EU given at the minute the EU says that the UK's GDPR regime is fine. They have adequacy.
Yes,
If they say it's not fine, it's a big deal, including for businesses and civic society in Northern Ireland.
absolutely.
Have they said anything about this bill?
Not that I'm aware of.
The EU has not said anything about this bill to the UK government.
Not that I'm aware of.
Not that you're aware of. Okay. Would it be important for the executive to find that out, as the minister asked?
Minister hasn't asked, but again, the focus has been in the areas in which they're in the devolved space. There's obviously Westminster scrutiny of any of those bigger issues about relationship with the EU, but certainly our focus has been on the 3 areas of devolved competency.
Was this in the minister's first day brief, this issue?
I don't recall, so I don't want to give a misleading answer. I'll check that for you.
Okay, but both this minister and the previous minister were aware that there was going to have to be an LCM sought for this?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And did they ask at any point where this process was, or when there was going to be an LCM that they were going to have to bring before the Assembly?
Certainly there would have been catch-ups, but I think, to be fair, I take responsibility here for not kind of bringing it up on my, I have a weekly key issues meeting with the minister, and I certainly wasn't, I'll be honest with the committee, it wasn't at the top of my list of saying, Minister, could you, just to keep you updated, but we did provide ongoing, updates when asked, but I would not have been as proactive on that as probably I should have been.
Okay, but they were aware, so they were aware the whole way through that this was happening. Okay, just recently a UK minister in the Commons, Chris Bryant, appeared to be under a bit of a misapprehension, or he said that this was all sorted. Has the department corrected him?
Yeah, we are engaging in terms of making sure that the understanding is improved at both sides, if you will. Certainly a better understanding of what our considerations have to be in a local context around Windsor matters, but we are engaging at official level in terms of that matter.
Just to be clear, as we sit here right now, what is the UK government think is going to happen with this LCM? Are they aware that there will not be an LCM?
We've had engagement through the NIO to inform them that the process would be for the Assembly to note the position and not seeking consent.
Okay. I think it's very important that they are clear that there will not be an LCM.
Yep.
Because based on what Chris Bryan said in Parliament, it would appear as if he was almost implying that this is all on hand and it's going to happen soon. That's just not true.
Yep. And the NIO are aware that the process that we will follow is to seek the Assembly to note the motion rather than give consent, given that we completely accept we're past the stage where any amendments could be reflected in the UK bill.
Yeah, okay. Did you think at any point, whenever the Minister was applying for urgent procedure to get this LCM, so the urgent procedure was sought from the First and Deputy First Minister and the Executive on the 16th of May, at that point, was there any thought that this is a bit mad, we can't really ask the Assembly to give legislative consent to something on this timescale?
It was Chair, this is where I suppose we have to apologise certainly for our lack of understanding of an alternative approach, which would have been the approach we're now taking. We should have taken that approach earlier. However, I should say we should never have found ourselves having to adopt that approach in the first place, so we certainly should have had, in my view, much closer, I suppose, scrutiny or update on where the Windsor Framework considerations were getting to, and as we saw those taking longer, we should have had a step in there where we escalated that matter through to DCIT, but also to keep the committee informed of that is what was happening. That, in a sense, should have driven that process to be a lot shorter than what it turned out to be. If you look back, Scotland led their LCM on the 22nd of November. We had already started our Windsor Framework deliberations prior to that. It was 3 months after that that we were in a position to have clarity on the Windsor Framework issue. So that whole process we need to find a quicker way of going through that process or starting it earlier.
I would just say, I worry that the LCM process, which has been fatally damaged by both there not being an Assembly and the Brexit process, where basically the will of devolved legislatures was kind of ramroded. I worry that this is another big reputational hit to the very idea of LCMs and the Sewell Convention. But we'll bring in members. Diane Forsyth.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both for coming. Neil, thank you for acknowledging the responsibility and setting out the hope to change things going forward, particularly with the tracker of LCMs, so as we get used to knowing what we're looking for. In terms of this one, it's very unfortunate, but it certainly brings to light how Article 2 Windsor Framework really adds to the frustration of some of the processes that we have in place here. But in terms of this one specifically, you've outlined how you had 3 months worth of going back and forward over Article 2, diminution of rights between solicitors. To me, that would imply that you would have been more likely to raise concerns with the committee because there was a lot of back and forth, rather than for it to apparently, slip the department's mind to bring it to the attention of the committee, and just brings concern as to why, when there was so much back and forth, that the committee wasn't involved. So I just want to ask if you understand, our concern with relation to that, and how we weren't kept in the loop over a 3-month back and forward between solicitors and Department of Finance and UK Government.
Yeah, absolutely. And when as often when said out like that, it does sound, well, why wouldn't you? But of course, each of those weeks, you don't know that that's not going to be the last week. So it speaks to this tracker, the fact that, when you're trying to run in the department and you've got your weekly log of all the problems you've to solve this week, if you're not having something that says, right, that's now triggered a month, that's triggered 2 months, where are we? It was also a little bit unknown. So the fact, we'd obviously assumed we'd get the full UK assessment, that would then allow us to be able to consider from a legal perspective exactly what they thought and how they walked through it. Well, not having that was a bit of a surprise. So the first sort of course of action was to see, could we get, the first few weeks were spent finding out could we get that and why we couldn't. And then it then had to create, and to be fair, and certainly in speaking to UKG, they were very willing to put forward the legal people to discuss with ours. The extent to which that was represented a long back and forth, or whether that represented a number of questions that took a while to get a response to, I don't know. I don't have the detail of the legal back and forward, so I wasn't aware as to whether it was a series of 20 or 30 questions, or whether it was a set of questions that took a number of weeks to get a response to, given pressures on the UKG side as well as on our own. So I don't know whether it was a case of a level of complexity that made the decision difficult to do, or whether a large part of that was to do with the fact that we didn't expect to be in this position, about why we couldn't see the full assessment. It's also something now, we have obviously the right legal expertise, but a lot of this is new ground. So there are new issues being teased out for the first time, so it probably takes a little bit longer than perhaps you would find the next time when you knew where you were going straight to get to. But to be honest and transparent in my answer, I couldn't honestly say to you whether it was a series of exchanges. Don't tend to look into the, let the legal process do its piece and wait for the result. It wasn't a case of me being able to say to the committee there were 40 issues of complexity. I don't know. I don't know the honest answer.
Thank you. And just given that this particular bill has had a number of issues that have bounced back and forward between the Lords and the Commons, it is just really disappointing that this Assembly won't be given the opportunity to go through the detail. You said we're just going to be asked to take note rather than give consent on some issues where a lot of us have quite significant concerns. And I just want to ask you, has the Minister provided his view to the UK Government on whether there should be more than 2 genders permitted when someone creates a digital account or identity?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay, thank you. And again, this is one of the things that it would be good to have clarity on what the Northern Ireland position was, what our Minister put forward in terms of this. But again, just very disappointing that we haven't had the opportunity to go through this at committee. Process wasn't followed, and it sets a very dangerous tone to those out there that are looking on. And we hope that as these things progress, the tracker will certainly help to capture things as they go forward, and we'll look on to see how this progresses through Westminster.
Yeah, thank you. And as I said, my assurance again that we'll not be in this position in this way again. I've certainly learned considerably from the level of... it's certainly been something in my career as a Perm Secretary I'm learning more and more, which is the importance of keeping people involved on the journey. I've typically in my previous roles always tried to solve the problem and bring the answer. It's very important from a scrutiny perspective that as we go through the journey, the level of transparency is as high as it can be, and I've certainly learned considerably from the process of this one and its unfortunate circumstances.
Okay, Deacon.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed, team. Look, there's a lot of things that this is very unsettling about, and I made my declaration earlier because I also sit in the Windsor Framework Democratic Scrutiny Committee. And of course, one of the things we have is the risk register that is produced by the TEO of all pieces of legislation, not just the ones that are specifically coming forward about areas where there's likely to be concerns about. I read that assiduously. I didn't see any indication of any reds or anything in this whatsoever. So, as a question from, it'll either be from this committee or it'll be a committee from the Windsor Framework Committee, why didn't that happen? This was a significant risk. Why hadn't it been raised? And why hadn't it been identified? And why hadn't it been identified at the Windsor Framework Committee either? And I hear what you say, but look, we know that the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission were all over this because they'd been briefed right at the beginning. So they knew what the issues were. And they actually raised their concerns directly to the House of Lords General Committee in March of this year, 2025. So it was very clear that they were aware of some of the issues with the Windsor Framework and the Article 2 compliance issues and the rest of it. And the House of Lords were aware of it. Indeed, the House of Commons were aware of it because the Honourable Robin Swan, the MP for South Antrim, wouldn't have been raising the questions with the Minister unless he had concerns with it. So how did we get into that situation that the Human Rights Commission were over the issues with Article 2A and the Assembly wasn't?
Well, a couple of things there. Firstly, on your first point, I accept that in terms of the assessment of risks. But as I said earlier, and again, something for me to consider, we had put our focus on where is the legislation in the devolved arena as opposed to the wider consideration of the bill at Westminster. So our big focus was on do the areas in which they're legislating in the devolved space interact with the concerns that the Human Rights Commission had. And the advice that we had was, after the protracted period of time, that it wasn't in the areas in which they were legislating in the devolved space that those concerns and therefore weren't relevant to the consideration of those 3 items that we had our focus on. So the wider consideration, Minister very much aware and asked frequently about the human rights issues, and indeed his press on us was to determine whether these areas in which were being legislated in the devolved space were the areas in which the Human Rights Commission's concerns intersected, and the legal advice for us was that it was not.
So the Minister was concerned about the issues with the human rights issues that have been raised all the way through this process.
But they're not in the devolved space.
But if the Minister, because he was concerned about it, so there's obviously a degree of concern out there about the process that was ongoing, even if it was to come back to us to say in the Assembly, oh, these are issues that are out with the sort of the legislative consent issues, and these are wider Windsor framework issues. Why was there no communication?
I take that issue about, and certainly my responsibility for understanding at what point that communication could be given. Obviously waiting to get that legal advice, to making sure that was the position, and then providing that to the Minister for that reassurance as to where those issues were. But in terms of the level of communication to the committee, that's absolutely on me.
It's also not just with this committee, it's also with other committees. Look, there is a cultural issue here around the Windsor framework about informing people, informing issues. And I think this has been highlighted by this. But it brings me to another thing, which is it's a real concern with me. You've talked about sort of your proposal to deal with this issue is it's going to be specifically, we're going to note as an Assembly. So as part of the overall process for legislative consent measures, Scotland votes on it, Wales votes on it, but in Northern Ireland we note it because of the difficulties of the Windsor framework. So therefore, we are setting a precedent. What's the views of the Attorney-General on this?
To my know, I haven't sought them, but so I don't know.
So you're coming to us with a proposal how you're going to deal with this, which is something, a fundamentally constitutional change in how the system works across the United Kingdom, and we haven't sought legal advice from the Attorney-General.
I'll take that away.
I'm not entirely sure if it's fundamental constitutional change. I'm not quite sure I understand
Sorry, through the Chair, I think it is because if legislative consent motions previously have had to have the requirement of being signed off by the 3 regional parliaments, and on this occasion we're not doing it because this is a really significant issue, as you've already pointed out, Chair, about GDPR and some other issues as well, and we're only noting it that the legislation is going to go through. There's no reason why this can't be used as precedent before, unless I can get some definition from sort of the Attorney-General or sort of the legal process that this is in fact the case.
Okay, well, I mean, I'm happy for us to pursue that. This is a total fiasco, but it's also important to say LCMs aren't legally binding.
Right, but
as we know, Parliament is sovereign. Just to clarify that point, this will have no legal. Constitutionally, potentially, because the UK Constitution is based heavily on convention, but this convention has been trampled on all over before. So there's a deeper question about understanding of LCMs and competence. But I think it's important to say that in legal terms, this will have very limited legal, if any. In fact, because these aren't legal instruments. But go on ahead.
Sorry, Chair.
Yes.
I acknowledge what you say, but I fundamentally disagree with that. I think this is something of significance. Is if we are taking the point.
It's definitely significant, but it's whether it's legal. It's a different thing. But anyway, go ahead.
I think it is considerable concerns. I've already raised the issues about sort of risk registers, informing people on what there is. I think one of the concerns, and maybe you, Neil, and for once, actually, I'm really glad to hear a permanent secretary taking responsibility. You're the first one I've heard in a very long time. One of the issues we need to make sure here is that the processes that across the culture of the Northern Ireland Civil Service, when you're reporting risk registers and concerns, particularly about the Windsor framework, this is a fundamental one, and it didn't even. I'll have to check again because there's reams of this stuff where this actually is, but I'm not quite sure how we get to the stage where we're using the Windsor framework as an excuse for this to occur, when the likes of the Human Rights Commission and various other people throughout the whole mechanism of government were informed of this, and this committee wasn't. That's the second point. I'll leave that one on the record. The third one is, and I just want to tease out, and I know I'm also, again, speaking of my position as Deputy Speaker here, and the Speaker raised concerns yesterday about how we're being kept informed and how we're doing this. There is an issue in Westminster at the moment. There was a Minister of the Crown has responded to a Member of Parliament on an issue, and I don't think we have had clarity yet on how that is being resolved and how that's going to be resolved for the record. Now, that is an issue for another place, which would be Westminster, but obviously there is now an issue where potentially a minister, through whatever reason, has misled, not intentionally, a member of Parliament in Parliament over a piece of wider legislation. And I would just probably like to have a bit more clarity about what we're doing to resolve that. And has anybody considered writing to the Speaker of the House of Commons to apologise for the process that has happened? Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have an answer to that yet. I'll take that away and consider what the most appropriate. As you say, I don't think on any side there was any intent to mislead. The question is just that we learn the lessons on both sides. I should also say to your previous question, we're engaging carefully with our TEO colleagues. Obviously, our guidelines around how to handle LCMs are due a refresh anyway, at least to refer to how to deal with it through Windsor, and indeed speaking to the clerk and others, we're talking about how to use the expertise of himself to maybe work alongside our board about making sure all of our officials are fully briefed. But there's clearly a lesson for me too, to make sure that understanding of the legislative process is a little bit more informed than it was going into this. Also, I think one of the most important points you allude to, which is one that I struggle with quite a bit, is that ability to be able to note when something's becoming more of an issue, because you start out in something thinking it'll take a week or two, and then the world comes in around you and you think, well, I need to check up on that, and then you start setting lists and they're hundreds of items long. So I think we just need to make sure we get a much tighter process around this. I do say again, and recognising the big exam question here is how we handle Windsor framework assessments, because that was why Scotland and Wales could move at a different pace to us.
Okay, thank you. I do think it's important, though, as Dr. Aiken said, that if there is any legal context to this, my broad understanding of LCMs is that these are conventions which are constitutionally significant, but that's not the same thing as being legally binding. But if there's any legal advice that the department has sought or received, not just about the specifics of where Article 2 is engaged, but the LCM process and network, because we would like to see that. And it may be that one of the actions coming out of this is more of a written branch look at how LCMs are understood at the Assembly level. I'll just bring in others. Philip Redd.
Thank you, Chair, and colleagues. Thank you, and apologies for my lateness this morning. Listen, fair play to you for fronting up on this. If you make a mistake, we all do it, but it's how you learn from it and react to it. I just wanted to pick up, you had said, Paul, in relation to there was competencies for other committees. I think you said infrastructure and economy. Had their ministers given approval for the finance minister to take forward this LCM?
There was engagement with executive colleagues on it.
Okay. Just I sit on one of those committees and it never came to the economy committee to say that the economy committee had given, or the economy minister had given their approval for the finance minister to take forward this LCM.
Yeah, there was engagement with the other two lead departments, and the Department for Economy and the Department for Infrastructure, and the minister did then write to executive colleagues to get agreement to the LCM.
Okay, no problem at all. Last week, or sorry, the week before, when I think you, Paul, and your colleagues were on the Zoom call, one of the officials had mentioned that there were weekly meetings taking place between the Department for Finance, devolved regions, and with the UK government sponsoring department on this. What was actually discussed at that meeting, given the officials clearly didn't understand the LCM process?
I wasn't part of those discussions, but
what level then was the official who sat on those representing the Northern Ireland Executive?
So their grade would have been a grade 7 in the civil service.
Okay, and is that's normal that they would be on that?
It would be, yes.
Okay.
And I imagine a lot of the discussion would have been where the bill was in the parliamentary process,
okay,
and then updates from officials in terms of each of the devolved administrations where they were with their particular process at that time.
Sure. And do you think there just is, and listen, I don't understand it either, so this isn't an attack on officials, but do you think there is a or a failure to fully comprehend the legislative process that Westminster goes through within the Department for Finance?
I would say, as the head of that department, I think we have a lot to learn. I think there are we're not a department that does a lot of legislation, so we don't have a huge long cadre of people who've been through many of these. Indeed, this LCMs with Windsor is a sort of cutting new ground in a way. It's something that we want to make sure is a system. It wouldn't be an area we would invest heavily in because we don't do it very often, but making sure we have the right support from others in TEO and elsewhere. But there will be a learning from this for me to make sure that we are as up to date, and me in particular, so that I can provide the right prompts and challenges to make sure. But you would be absolutely correct in saying that our expertise, knowledge and ability to navigate a complicated and unusual LCM journey that brought in the new Windsor framework considerations was not as refined as I would hope it would be going forward.
And then if the Minister for Finance had written to executive colleagues, particularly the Department for Infrastructure and Economy, to get approval for the LCM, if that approval came forward, why then did the Minister only write on the 16th of May to the First and Deputy First Minister seeking urgent procedure?
So my understanding is the Minister wrote to executive colleagues on the 9th of May, and that issue was considered was to be considered at the executive meeting on the 15th. Yes. However, it was brought up under any other business, and the Minister then wrote on the 16th to the First and Deputy First Minister to move the issue forward under urgent procedures.
So the Department for Infrastructure and Economy were only told about the LCM on the 9th of May?
Yes.
Okay. And at what stage then, given that the department knew that there was competency for both infrastructure and economy, had been sitting on weekly meetings for over a year, did they say, oh, actually, we might need to tell our two departmental colleagues who require to approve this?
Well, there was certainly engagement at a departmental level with the two other departments. So throughout, the Department for Economy and Department for Infrastructure were engaged on the provisions within the bill that related to their areas. And neither department had any issues and actually welcomed what was coming forward.
And then final question from me, what was the trigger point then for the 9th of May letter / the 16th urgent procedure that the Minister for Finance had realised that there had been a huge difficulty with the process and due process hadn't been followed? What was the trigger point?
I think the trigger was the parliamentary process reaching a conclusion within the Houses of Parliament.
Okay. And that was...
But particular to us as well was getting all both the legal advice back, but also our response to the queries that the Minister had raised. And once he was content with those queries that he'd asked, he was then in a position as well to take that forward. So both the legal on Windsor and also answering any ministerial queries were also part of that consideration he had to give before he would bring it forward.
At what point, Neil, did you then go to the Minister and say, we have missed the boat on this, you need to urgently write to the First and Deputy First Minister to try and get this cleared?
Well, once we got the clarity and the legal advice, we then put the papers, as soon as we were ready with them, straight to Minister to consider going forward. But I have to be honest, I'll be honest, there wasn't a case of me saying, and again, lesson for me, I didn't hold up a sort of an alert to the Minister to say, Minister, there's a particular deadline here. We were working back from Royal Assent and we still were working to that particular time frame. My focus was getting answers to the queries and getting the legal advice through. But in terms of the escalation that you would talk about, it's not something I did and should have done. I should have done.
What date did the final submission go to the Minister from you?
I'd need to check that, and I'll come back to that in terms of the date of when we got it after we got the legal advice. I don't want to give you the wrong date, so I'll confirm
we do need that date, please.
I'll confirm that for you.
But no, listen, the main takeaway from this, obviously it's a difficult scenario, but I do actually think that you both and your colleagues have been very obviously generous with your time, but also self-deprecating, so fair play to us.
Chair, just sort of the legal advice, I know it'll probably be restricted, but could we have it in a covered version?
I think we'll discuss that just at the end, or any further actions. Deirdre Hargey.
Yeah, no, again, just thanks very much. And as has been said, I think the tracker will be useful. And I think it would be useful even to share with other committees, because it's not unique to this committee. I mean, I think that's fair. It's not just down to yourselves, and it shows the complexity of LCAMs and legislation, particularly when it's draconian in nature at Westminster, and the challenges that presents. And I think for me, even in terms of the Article 2 and Windsor framework, while that presents challenges, it also presents protections in terms of human rights protections and additions as well. And we've seen that even in terms of the Court of Appeal in the Dillon case, particularly when you're looking at rights, that they should be seen broadly in terms of civil rights, and obviously some of those interact then with this bill coming forward. It may not be in the constraint in terms of the legislative consent areas, but certainly in the broader aspects. And I think part of the difficulty, that you've highlighted, has been the challenge or the interpretation of the impact on Article 2. That Westminster's saying one thing, and legal advice or the Human Rights Commission have a difference of view, and this has come up on other committees as well and other LCMs, actually, to the fact that the Human Rights Commission's concerns have not been represented. So I think it would be useful as well that with any LCMs going forward, and again not unique to this area, that any I suppose written response from the Human Rights Commission here, that they're included in any of the packs as well, so that we can all have that information up front. Because I did highlight last week that I thought the Minister was querying some of the human rights implications and what that would mean for citizens here. And I think that's the right thing to do. That's part of the role of why we're here. That's the protections around the Windsor Framework as well. And whilst it's complex, that's why the Human Rights Commission have set up a whole department within the Commission looking at Article 2, because it is a huge area of complex legislation which does continue to change, and where there's legal challenges that again cement some of those areas of work as well. So it is just to get, could we ensure going forward, and I suppose what engagement can be had across the executive then in terms of a consistent approach, to some of the challenges. There may be some LCMs that don't really interact in the same way with rights, but I suppose it's learning for us all, and you have recognised that in fairness to you and put your hands up to that as well. But it's not unique to the Finance Department. This is across all executive departments. So it is just to see what learning, as you say, Neil, there's learning from this, but how do we ensure that that's replicated across all the executive departments?
Yes, and I think we'll be liaising closely with TEO colleagues about the sort of guidelines to all committees, but also engaging closely with our UKG colleagues as well, as we try to understand the time that we need to scrutiny.
And do you believe...
Briefly, we're going to have a plenary kicking off in a few minutes, and there will be members who want to get in for a matter of the day, so we may not be quorate at that point, but just to say, so if we could obviously go ahead, but we'll be need to put not a hard stop, but a probable stop at 10:30.
I think that's a key part as well, that engagement with Westminster, because some of the responses that do compact, particularly around the Windsor Framework, it's like there's no human rights implications, when obviously our own Human Rights Commission here will say something different.
Yes.
And I think that's why it's important to put their information front and centre, that we can view that as well, and that we can push back at Westminster also in terms of making sure that there's no diminution of rights going forward.
Yes, and as you've mentioned, each is different, so you can't say how long the process would take, you never can legally, but just that recognition of the legal process and due diligence that we need to do here locally to be able to provide feedback to UKG, so we'll continue that engagement.
Thank you.
Okay. There's several bits we need to follow up on. I do acknowledge that you have both come, and there's an evidence session a couple of weeks ago when Paul and his colleagues come. That obviously is a plea in mitigation, but it's important that we are clear that this is not an acceptable situation we found ourselves in. I accept that we've had accountability and responsibility taken for yourselves, but we need to, I think, better understand a little bit of the process. We've got a lot of the detail today, but in response to Mr. Brett's question, we do need to understand when the Minister was briefed and what he was told about time pressure. We also need to understand what exactly is being communicated to the UK government. This, I think, my worry in a broader sense is that this undermines the already heavily undermined and discredited process of legislative consent, which is supposed to be a big part of the devolved settlement here, but has been trampled over repeatedly by successive British governments, particularly through the Brexit process. And if they are standing up in the Commons and saying, well, there's just a procedural thing and Northern Ireland's going to give its consent, and even if they're saying at some point, I don't want to hear a UK minister standing up and saying, well, they've kind of given their consent, they've debated it, and there's kind of semi-consent been given. that isn't the case. I think this is a situation where we will have a slightly surreal moment of a debate, which in fairness is like most of the debates we have in the Assembly Chamber, i.e. it's a debate without a particular consequence, it's a take-note debate, but the UK government needs to understand that isn't legislative consent, nor is it even an imitation or shadow of legislative consent. So those bits of information are really critical going forward. We also need to understand, in a broader sense, you touched on it a bit today, Neil, but what are the specific actions that are coming out for your counterparts across the executive, including in the executive office, in terms of Northern Ireland civil service wide understanding of the LCM process and understanding of the legislative process, because it appears, frankly, to have disastrously kind of fallen apart in this instance. Thankfully, it's not a piece of primary legislation in a devolved context, but it does raise questions about legislative competence more generally. And obviously, we're still only less than a decade on from the RHI scandal, and that is in the back of people's minds when they think about the credibility of our institutions and our civil service. So we have to show that we are understanding when we've got things wrong. There's clearly a Brexit and Windsor framework context to this, and there's specific lessons there, including for the Democratic Scrutiny Committee. But I think at that, if no one has indicated they wish to ask any further questions, we do want to follow up on the specific points we've raised, and there would be more work for us and others to do. But at that point, I think we'll draw the proceedings to a conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So, members, I don't think unless anyone has any other urgent business they want to raise now.
Chair, just
yes.
can I seek members' agreement to share the update that we received from the department with the business office and speaker's office, so that they're aware of everything that the committee has.
Thank you. Great.
Okay.
Chair, and the other thing is to ask the department to ensure that it sends the committee the wording for this motion that's being brought forward as soon as possible.
Yeah, and it's very important the UK government do not portray this as legislative consent of any kind. Okay, if members are content, I'm going to move to date, time, place of next meeting, which is tomorrow, 12:15. It's actually the meeting's at 2 p.m. in Studio Ulster. You have the details of that. A lunch is being organised beforehand, but I'm going to put the question: the committee does not adjourn. The committee is now adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you,
Thanks
Peter.
all.
Senate Chamber. Sound. Senate Chamber. Sound.